So we've never made the case or argued the case that somehow Osama bin Laden was directly involved in 9/11. That evidence has never been forthcoming.
No terrorist say poses a greater or more immediate threat to the security of our people and the stability of the world than the regime of Saddam Hussein.
The Iraqi regime is a threat to any American.
There is no doubt that Saddam Hussein now has
This isn't just a film about 9/11 and the wars that followed. This isn't just about the lies from the press and the Pentagon. It's about our world, and how information is conveyed, and how prejudice is fostered by deception. About how we are subjected to indoctrination and used and pitted against one another. To understand the massive military expenditures and how they are eating up so much wealth, the first hurdles we have to get over are the trust in the mass media and the stigma associated with the concept of conspiracy. Every time the CIA or any other intelligence agency does a covert operation, that's a conspiracy. It's a bunch of people getting together in secret to do something illegal and lying to everyone else.
In the Gulf of Tonkin.
There are a lot of strange conspiracies about many things, but that is not a reason to reject conspiracies categorically. For example, the Iran-Contra affair was a massive government conspiracy hidden from the press and public for years. It happened in my lifetime, and it involved billions of dollars in multiple countries. This was a case where one part of the government didn't even know what another part of the government was doing. Thousands of people were murdered. Multiple countries in Central America as well as Iran and Israel were involved. And yet it was kept as a total secret from the media, or perhaps by the media, for years. Not only was it possible to hide this from the public, but most of the government was unaware of the activities of a small cabal from within. Covert actions and deception in the press aren't irregular, they're normal. When patriots expose how blatantly obvious it is that there is a cover-up, regardless of how much evidence they have, the criminal's last refuge is to hide behind the stigma of conspiracy. They want you to ignore history in favor of belief based on authority. Purposely promoting the asinine obfuscates investigation, poisons credibility, and misdirects valuable time and research. State deception and conspiracy isn't rare, it's normal. Blindly believing your TV is irresponsible and it's stupid. There is nothing kooky or funny about covert warfare and assassinations. It deserves open scrutiny and sincere investigation. I'm going to show you some live clips about the truck bombings in case you never saw them, forgot about them, or don't believe me. And also pay attention to these live reports about explosions at the base, the lobby, the basement of the building. These are reports from eyewitnesses, survivors, firemen, police, and the FBI. This would all get a nice church-off whitewashing and be replaced by pancake theories on one extreme and disinformation ranging from everything from Bavarian death cults to space aliens on the other.
NBC's Pat Dawson is close to the scene of that attack. Pat?
Just moments ago, I spoke to the chief of safety for the New York City Fire Department. He received word of the possibility of a secondary device, that is another bomb going off. He tried to get his men out as quickly as he could, but he said that there was another explosion which took place. And then an hour after the first hit here, with the first crash that took place, he said, there was another explosion that took place in one of the towers here. According to his theory, he thinks that there were actually devices that were planted in the building. The second device he speculates, was probably planted in the building.
That That's what some people are saying. Now,
hit the base of the South Tower.
I was under the impression that it was just the actual collapse of the building, but some people are speculating that. I mean, I didn't want to say that because...
Maybe they had that was an incredible.
That was an incredible explosion.
That does not cause from a.
I agree with you. I think it was the third plane, but again,
no, it could have been something. It could have been something that was planted.
Or a bomb planted in the building.
But as soon as I got outside, I heard a second explosion and another rumble. And then a fire marshal came in and said we had to leave because if there was a third explosion, this building might not last.
And you were working there? Yes, I was right there. I was down in the basement, came down, all of a sudden the elevator blew up, smoke. I dragged the guy out, his skin was hanging off, and I dragged him out.
They saw an airliner go into one of those towers. Then, an hour later than that, we had that big explosion from much, much lower. I don't know what on earth caused that.
We've heard reports of secondary explosions after the aircraft impacted, whether in fact there wasn't something else at the base of the towers that in fact were the coup de grace to bring them to the ground.
Do we have Jim Smith available on microphone from Chopper 2 as he takes these pictures? Jim?
Yes, I am here, Michael.
Jim, tell us what's happening out there.
We just witnessed some kind of secondary follow-up explosion on the World Trade Center number 2, the one that is on the south that is difficult to make out.
As effective as a bomb being dropped there were two bombs in effect. Commercial airliners flown into those two buildings and they came down. We presume because of the initial explosion there may have been secondary explosions as well that were detonated in the building by these terrorists.
That would put us about a block and a half away from the site of where the explosion was. That area has just been evacuated because police have found what they described as a suspicious device, and they fear that it might be something that could lead to another explosion. Obviously, there's a real sense of caution here on the part of police. I spoke with some police officials moments ago, Chris, and they told me that they have reason to believe that one of the explosions at the World Trade Center, aside from the ones that may have been caused by the impact of the plane with the building, may have been caused by a van that was parked in the building that may have had some type of explosive device in it. So their fear is that there may have been explosive device planted either in the building or in the adjacent area. Yeah, I'm okay, all right? Here, no. You want to call your mother or something? All right? Don't worry about me. You need to make calls right now.
We just heard another explosion. They're handing out gloves and masks.
I think a bomb went off in the lobby first, then a plane hit the building. But then another plane hit the other building. But when I was coming through the doors on the other side of the Trade Center, either they blew the lobby up or something, because it blew the glass out of the doors and knocked us all down, and I got smoke and everything on me. I just feel a little shook up because I got blasted, you know. So.
The ladies that are with me were in the World Trade Center in the first building and escaped through the lobby where they believe there was a bomb in the lobby.
And even the turnstile was burnt and was sticking up, and they just told us to run.
And as we were coming out, we passed the lobby. There was no lobby. So I believe the bomb hit the lobby first, and a couple of seconds in the first plane hit.
And all of a sudden it sounded like, I don't know where the subway is, but it sounded like a subway collision, a bomb, and it was just pounding, boom, 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 and I literally thought the subway had exploded and all the cars pissing around on top of it. It was so loud.
I was actually in the subway heading towards the World Trade Center right around Franklin Street, and after the first explosion, the subway station started to fill with smoke. The subway cars started to fill with smoke, and the subways actually stopped.
It was that he was in the lobby of World Trade Center 1 when the first plane hit. And when the debris started coming down, he went back to go into the building to protect himself and was in the revolving doors going back in off West Street when he looked up and a fireball came flying out and blew out all the windows and threw him back onto the street.
Once the plane hit the top, then that's when the bomb was going off on the first floor. It's like the plane was actually hitting the first floor. You was hearing boom, 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 boom.
Explosion that was in the World Trade Center at about 8:46 a.m. in the morning. The explosion came from, I believe, at first we believed that it came from the mechanical room. And then We heard a series of other explosions that sounded up on the above levels of the building, to where we then realized that there was something wrong and there was a major problem.
What happened? It was an explosion. He was in the lobby, and the third explosion, the whole lobby collapsed on us.
What was it like? What was it like?
Horrible.
It's like hell. You don't want to know.
The whole building just collapsed on us inside the lobby.
Was that a secondary explosion?
Yes, it was.
That was the plant, probably?
Yeah, definitely a secondary explosion. But we was inside waiting to go upstairs, and on the way upstairs, the whole fucking plane blew. And we just collapsed on everybody inside the lobby.
Similar to the first tower coming down, secondary?
I don't know about the first one, but I know the second one, it was terrible. Then there was a third one, too, after that one. Yes, sir. Everybody was inside the building, waiting to go upstairs. And they just let loose. Everything just let loose inside the building.
So what you told me is that there was a plane or whatever hit the building, then a secondary explosion.
It was like 3 explosions after that. We came in after the fire. We came when the fire was going on already. We was in the staging area inside the building, waiting to go upstairs. And they exploded. The whole lobby collapsed on the lobby inside.
Right in front of our eyes.
Just I know at least 3 or 4.
It was so surreal, like a movie set. Second and third explosions also, right?
We were in the building for the third one. It collapsed. It was on this drive here for the other one. This is on top of this. It couldn't be no worse than this. Couldn't be nothing no more worse than this. You're in the building trying to help people, and it's exploding on the inside the building. So I don't think we get any worse than this.
Joining me is Jack Kelly. Now, he is a foreign correspondent. He has some information about these attacks. Jack, what can you tell us happened first in New York?
Apparently what appears to happen was that at the same time 2 planes hit the building, that the FBI most likely thinks that there was a car or truck packed with explosives underneath the buildings, which also exploded at the same time and brought both of them down.
Now, that's the first time we're hearing that. So 2 planes and explosives that were in the building. Is that correct?
That is the working theory at this point. That is still unconfirmed, but that is what the FBI is going on at this point.
The New York City Police Department has a report that the FBI is responding to New Jersey because a truck reportedly loaded with explosives has been stopped by authorities on the road there, and the men with that truck have been detained. Members of the Joint Terrorist Task Force, according to the New York police officials, are responding to question those people. I want to underline that all the phones to police headquarters and to the FBI from here seem to be disabled.
They stopped the truck, they found an entire truck full of explosives, and they arrested them. Those 2 men and their explosives are in police custody tonight, and another tragedy has been averted.
Still alive in the rubble in and around the World Trade Center. And word late tonight that 2 suspects are in FBI custody after a truckload of explosives was discovered around the George Washington Bridge. That bridge links New York to New Jersey over the Hudson River. Whether the discovery of those explosives had anything to do with other events of the day is unclear, but the FBI has 2 suspects in hand, said the truck load of explosives, enough explosives were in the truck to do great damage to the George Washington Bridge. But they arrested the 2 suspects, and they're questioning them as we speak.
And that it was near the George Washington Bridge. There were 2 or 3 men who were in the van. The van was pulled over. It is not clear why the van was pulled over, but when it was, law enforcers found tons of explosives inside of the van.
George Washington Bridge, Marcia.
Well, you know, Todd, it's really an amazing thing. Most of New York City's rescue operations and their police and fire departments have been concentrating their actions down in lower Manhattan, where the 2 planes hit the 2 towers of the World Trade Center. But some very intelligent and aggressive cops also stopped another terrorist attack from happening on the George Washington Bridge. CBS 2 has learned exclusively that 2 men are in custody tonight after being arrested at the George Washington Bridge with an entire truckload of explosives.
The FBI has now put out a nationwide APB all-points bulletin for a white Chevy van with New Jersey registration. Written on the back is Urban Moving Systems.
There were at least 2, possibly 3 vans stopped by police on 9/11, and another 4th van spotted by a journalist. One had 5 individuals and traces of explosives. Another had 2 individuals and was packed with explosives. A 3rd van got away, and a 4th was possibly a diversion. The first van had been spotted earlier in Liberty State Park by a witness who saw 3 men celebrating and filming the World Trade Center attack. The timelines given by Sylvan Kirschberg and Paul Kirschberg, Yaron Schmel, Omar Mamari, and Oded Eldner were all over the place, and each had tickets to leave the U.S. with immediate travel dates to destinations all over the world. Oded Eldner, who had $4,700 stuffed in a sock, tried to lie to police about stopping for gas and claimed that he learned of the first explosion by telephone at 8 a.m. Problem being the first explosion wasn't until 8:45 a.m. Must have been a little nervous. Perhaps his greatest slip-up, though, was revealing that you could only see one side of one tower from the roof of Urban Moving Systems, so they moved to another spot with a full view of the length of both towers so that they could document the event. Eyewitnesses had seen them already on top of the roof of their van, posing and taking pictures only 5 minutes after the first plane crash. Urban Moving Systems is at least 5 minutes away. They were already on the roof of a parking garage in place looking at the north side of the North Tower, which is exactly where the plane impacted. From the police reports, we gathered a helicopter for the local radio station AM 880 can be seen in the foreground of one of the photographs taken by the dancing Israelis, and the FFA traffic records show it was hovering over the Hudson River between 8:50 and 9:03 a.m. The Israelis took 76 photographs, and eyewitnesses also saw them video recording the event. They can be visibly seen smiling. Sylvan Kirschberg is even shown flicking a green lighter as if he was at a rock concert. Interestingly, Sylvan Kirschberg had been spotted in the Doric Towers the day before on 9/10/2001. He lied to 2 men in an elevator and said that he was a construction worker. He was positively identified in the police lineup. Both Doric Tower and the World Trade Centers were highlighted on maps of the area found in the van at the time of their arrest, and Sylvan admitted to the FBI polygrapher that he had been a map maker in Israel. Why would they have maps of New York with the World Trade Centers highlighted, as well as the place they were going to film and take pictures of the event from? Sylvan was also the driver that babbled on about Palestinians without any provocation to the police at the time of their arrest, and Yaron Schmel also lied to the police about their whereabouts, claiming that they were on the west side in New York on 9A.
The story that the feds build is a very good story. When you hear their story, you start even to believe it inside. Okay, maybe I'm a spy. I'm sure that I'm not, but the story is so good, so maybe I am.
Because of the timestamp of the bolo, as well as reports from the New York Times and Fox, we know these men had been filming the entire event, which shows prior knowledge. Because of the matching license plates, we know that this is the same van later pulled over on Route 3 in East Rutherford by police. It had 5 individuals. Now either the witness from Liberty State Park had not seen 2 of the men, or the 3 she did see had picked up 2 more. They were all Israelis, and had taken pictures of themselves flicking lighters with the burning World Trade Center in the background. The second plane had not even hit, and many assumed the first was a bizarre accident, but not these excited Israelis. They knew. Their van was traced back by its logo, Urban Moving Systems, to a front for the Israeli Mossad, Israel's CIA. 2 of the 5 men arrested's names popped up on the CFI and FBI's database as known Israeli agents. They had over $4,700 stuffed inside a sock and highlighted maps of New York and New Jersey. It gets even more interesting when the live reports report truck bombings as well as arrests, and then this suddenly disappears from the media and the American conscience. Instead, we are fed images of dancing Palestinians. It's funny how Palestinians were featured dancing on every single channel when this was a false prepackaged tape, and yet the Israelis who actually were dancing on 9/11 never see airtime. The dancing Israelis who were working for Mossad front company Urban Moving Systems get caught in a van with traces of explosives. They were filming the 9/11 attacks in New York with the planes crashing into the buildings before it happened. So they just decided to set up a film on that particular day, driving around in a van that had traces of explosives. And they just strolling through, you know, put a camera, let's point at the World Trade Center for no particular reason, just in case something happens. And then, of course, 9/11 happens. After the police pulled them over and demanded they get out of the vehicle, this is what happened, and I'll quote from Counterpunch. The driver, 23-year-old Sylvan Kurtzberg, refused and was asked several more times, but appeared to be fumbling with a black leather fanny pouch type of bag. With guns drawn, the police physically removed Kurtzberg, while 4 other men, 2 more men had apparently joined the group since the morning, were also removed from the van, handcuffed, placed on the grass medium, and read their Miranda rights. They had not been told the reasons for their arrest. Yet, according to DiCarlo's report, this officer was told without question by the driver, "We are Israeli. We are not your problem. Your problem are our problems. The Palestinians are the problem." Another of the 5 Israelis, again without prompting, told the officers, falsely, that we were on the West Side Highway in New York City during the incident. Why did they automatically assume they were being pulled over because of something to do with 9/11? Why did Yarin lie to the police without being prompted and say they were on the west side of New York when 9/11 happened, when we know they were not, as they were witnessed filming the first plane hitting and celebrating the attack, taking pictures of themselves and flicking lighters up in the air? What exactly were they hiding? They obviously knew the attack was happening. They were thrown in jail and they failed their polygraph test, but eventually they were deported back to Israel. Other Israeli spies were busted in several other states as well as Mexico, but nothing ever comes of it. Once they get arrested, the higher-ups always swoop in and deport them for visa violations. Some of the lower FBI and police are furious about this, but there's really nothing they can do about it. This event, damning as it is, has had a Lewinsky-style distraction effect, pulling attention away from the far more damning van stopped near the George Washington Bridge, packed with explosives. Aside from eyewitnesses, the van bombs and arrests were reported by ABC News, CBS, CNN, Haaretz, Jerusalem Post, Fox News, USA Today, the Wall Street Journal, the police themselves, Army Radio, several New Jersey papers, and so forth. Urban Moving Systems was only one of several fronts working that day, which also had prior access to the towers. These were not the only 2 mysterious set of vans stopped on 9/11. There was a 3rd truck, which was obviously a diversion, on King Street, which actually depicted a mural of a plane slamming into the World Trade Centers. And those 2 individuals were arrested. Obviously, this was a diversion to pull police in that direction, because no one would drive around in a truck with a painting of 9/11 on it on 9/11, unless they were purposely trying to attract the attention of the police, to pull them in a certain direction.
With a mural painted of an airplane diving into New York City and exploding. I don't know what's in the truck. The truck is in between 6th and 7th on King Street. Alright, 10-4, I'll send the issue in the bomb squad there for Westgate. The bird? Airplane diving into New York, blowing up. 2 men got out of the truck, ran away from it. We got those 2 under. That's good. Did you listen? You didn't get any further on those 2 guys over there? You alright over there, Jake? Yeah, both suspects under K. We have the suspects who driven. Go in the van and then...
There was also an emergency 911 telephone call reporting that Palestinian bomb makers in a white van were headed for the Holland Tunnel. Unless they had a flag or something, I'm not sure how the caller would be able to tell if they were Palestinian or not. The caller, using poor English, said, "I see them at the airport mixing something, and they were dressed like sheiks, dressed like an Arab." This would have fit well with propaganda aired later in the day of dancing Palestinians celebrating the attacks on 9/11, which turned out to be a false tape. Of course, the only people driving around in vans for an intelligence agency who actually were celebrating the attacks and were caught dancing were Israelis, and the first words out of the driver's mouth were, "We're Israelis, we're not your problem, Palestinians are the problem." Apparently this idiot hadn't put it together that the plan hadn't worked out as smoothly as they had hoped. Glenn Ford also spotted another van with 2 individuals speaking Hebrew and taking pictures of the towers. The van must have been in the park before or just as the towers were hit, because the park was closed after the first tower was hit. It was one of the only vehicles remaining in the park. The 2 men lied and said they were Polish. The Israelis arrested on 9/11, who were driving around in vans that were a front for the Mossad, were detained and interrogated. They all failed their polygraph test. However, they were released by Chertoff and deported back to Israel and left alone. The owner of the Urban Moving Systems warehouse, Dominic Suter, along with his wife, fled back to Israel. The FBI raided the complex and confiscated over a dozen computer hard drives. This is a man who got a $500,000 loan just prior to 9/11, only for that year. And the FBI listed him as an official suspect of 9/11. And he remains a suspect. We got these leaked from Cryptomy. We also have copies of the Polish and Italian transcripts. But you definitely wouldn't have heard this on the mainstream media. He was allowed to return to Israel, and they have no interest in letting him go, and the press isn't going to push for it. The FBI classified what they confiscated from the hard drives, and more than likely is sitting on the infamous S drive to protect itself from any Freedom of Information Act inquiries. From looking into Suter's financial records, we found that not only did the Mossad get him the loans for Urban Moving System, but also Aero Trucks, all of which were involved in the 9/11 attacks. That's not reported. The truck bombs are never followed up on, and the massive spy ring is never aired. How did the Israelis know what was going to happen? What happened to the truck bombers? Why were the reports of the truck bombs never brought up again, and the investigations into the spy rings never got airtime? Why is that? Well, I wouldn't hold my breath waiting for the U.S. media to do an in-depth report about it. Anything that can involve Israel is off limits. They won't even report on a 40-year, very open, very verifiable military occupation of racial colonization and ethnic cleansing that could make conquistadors blush. Israeli bulldozers in Palestine making forced segregation so that fanatical Jews can live in pure colonies. A woman and her children forced to leave their home. They can't live there. They're the wrong race. God said so.
To 15 people, 11 of them children.
Most, particularly in New York in the counterterrorism investigation of the World Trade Center attack, is that on a number of cases, suspects that they had sought to wiretap and surveil immediately changed their telecommunications processes. They started acting much differently as soon as those supposedly secret wiretaps went into place. Brett?
But the complaint about this system is that the wiretap computer programs made by Converse have in effect a back door through which wiretaps themselves can be intercepted by unauthorized parties. Adding to the suspicions is the fact that in Israel, Converse works closely with the Israeli government and under special programs gets reimbursed for up to 50% of its research and development costs by the Israeli Ministry of Industry and Trade. But investigators within the DEA, INS, and FBI have all told Fox News that to pursue or even suggest Israeli spying through Converse is considered career suicide.
7 people are in custody at 2 New York airports tonight. Reportedly, they produced pilot licenses which appear to be counterfeit. There is now no service out of New York airports.
He told us the operatives had been instructed to ensure that the explosives went off at a point that was high enough to prevent people trapped above from escaping.
Now, according to the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks upon the United States, Flight 93 was only 20 minutes away from Washington, D.C., if it was going 580 miles an hour. The flight recorder stopped at 10:03 in the morning. That means they would have hit D.C. around 10:23 in the morning. However, had it been going back to hit Building 7 in New York, it would have hit between 10:43 and 10:46. Interestingly, at 10:45, several news outlets reported hearing a fourth explosion at the World Trade Center in the smoke.
Is just stay in your home, stay put.
And we just received word that there was a fourth explosion at the World Trade Center. We have no idea what that was, if it was related to the first two explosions, secondary explosions from the first two, or obviously other attacks.
Some sketchy information here that another explosion, a fourth explosion out at the World Trade Center has gone off. One doesn't know if that's an ancillary thing because of what already happened, or an additional explosion of some kind outside of that.
Rose, we hate to interrupt you. We've just been told
A fourth explosion.
of a fourth explosion.
Now in the area of the World
Center.
Trade Center, obviously neither tower is still standing. We don't know the source of this fourth explosion.
One news outlet even reported that a 50-story building had collapsed.
But at 11:15, there was another collapse or explosion following the 10:30 collapse of the second tower. And a firefighter who rushed by us estimated that 50 stories went down.
Building 7 was 47 stories high. The timing fits and the size fits, but that building didn't collapse then. Even more interestingly is later in the day when the building actually did collapse, several news outlets again jumped the gun. The BBC report was so bad that they reported that Building 7 had fallen while Building 7 was still standing in the background of their report. A skyscraper housing offices for the CIA and, more importantly, the Security and Exchange Commission, investigating hundreds of billions of dollars worth of corporate fraud, falling straight down in a matter of seconds, isn't something you just ignore and skip. Both CNN and the BBC reported Building 7 fell before it had fallen.
We'll leave it there for the moment. We've got some news just coming in, actually, that the Salomon Brothers building in New York, right in the heart of Manhattan, has also collapsed. Many are saying is the worst attack on the country since Pearl Harbor. A huge operation is underway to find survivors from the wreckage of both towers of the World Trade Center in New York. They collapsed after hijacked airliners with passengers on board were flown into them. The 47-story Salomon Brothers building, situated very close to the World Trade Center, has also just collapsed. Now, more on the latest building collapse in New York. You might have heard a few moments ago I was talking about the Salomon Brothers building collapsing, and indeed it has. Apparently that's only a few hundred yards away from where the World Trade Center towers were, and it seems that this was not a result of a new attack. It was because the building had been weakened during this morning's attacks. We'll probably find out more now about that from our correspondent Jane Stanley. Jane, what more can you tell us about the Salomon Brothers building and its collapse?
Well, only really what you already know. Details are very, very sketchy. There's almost...
Sketchy indeed. Way to jump the script, guys.
As you can see behind me, the Trade Center appears to be still burning. We see the...
The 9/11 Commission's way of dealing with it was to not deal with it. Don't worry, that disastrous report was just confusion. That's why they also lost their live feed, coincidentally.
It almost sounded too far-fetched. I was wondering what it's felt like for you being in Manhattan. Well, unfortunately, I think we've lost the line with Jane Stanley in Manhattan.
It looked rather stupid without Flight 93 reaching its final destination for World Trade Center 7, but they had to do it anyway. There have been whistleblowers, of course, even from within FEMA, but who do they turn to? They can't go to the government with it, and they certainly can't go to the mainstream media with it. So if you're asking why more people haven't come forward, how exactly would you like them to do that? Go to who? And say what? Same as the hype for Iraq. You could scream until you were blue in the face, and it wouldn't be on TV. FEMA was responsible for the 9/11 cleanup. Oddly, they were positioned in New York on September 10th, the night before the attacks.
To be honest with you, we arrived on late Monday night and went into action on Tuesday morning. And not until today did we get a full opportunity to work the entire site other than the spot at Church and Day to which we were deployed.
FEMA, along with BPAC, gave some wonderfully silly cartoon explanations for how the towers collapsed. This administration seems to love cartoons. BPAC and FEMA, of course, worked together before in the Oklahoma City bombing cover-up. Managing emergencies meant controlling the crime scenes. Jet fuel, also known as kerosene, didn't weaken or melt any of the steel. The mass media claimed that rocket fuel or jet fuel got the temperatures high enough to weaken steel on the truss and have floors collapse one by one like pancakes on top of each other, apparently with no resistance at free fall speeds as well. But here we have a woman standing in a hole next to the truss. She's not burned. She's got a towel or some papers or rag or something she was waving around. Apparently her hair and clothing and the paper or towel that she had in her hand must have been made of the same magic fibers as the passports that didn't burn.
Sally, go round the roses.
Also in Washington, D.C., even though in New York, jet fuel could leave molten steel and metal in the basements of the building and weaken the truss to the degree to drop all their weight, the same jet fuel from the same type of airplane couldn't even burn wooden stools, plastic computers, and paper books. That must be it. Things made of paper, like passports and books, don't burn in fire, but metals do. Welcome to Bizarro World Physics. To pretend that America's foreign policy is based on benevolence is outstandingly ignorant. To deny the actuality of covert actions and massive deception is equally as asinine. There are way too many counterexamples of successful conspiracies and hoax. The media doesn't report it. The media is owned by the Pentagon. They have overlapping board of directorates. It is one large corporation. They lie. With the profitable Cold War over and hundreds of billions in security fraud and a network of mediums to obfuscate off-the-books financing for covert and illegal operations under investigation, an event was needed to cover the old crimes and create the atmosphere for new ones. This wasn't for America, or solely by American elements. It was multinational. Showing that 9/11 was done and why it was done and who covered it up isn't the same as how it was done. We've seen airplanes and truck bombs, but what about the other explosions higher up in the towers? If bombs were inside, how could they be set in there with so many employees working in the towers? And who did it? You can forget about security, that's a non-issue. But exactly how and where could one place charges without anyone noticing? A good place to start would be the men arrested for fake IDs that granted them access to the towers to fix sprinkler systems, upgrade internet cables, move out furniture, and work on chronically broken elevators, especially when the Israeli-owned company they claimed to work for had no authenticity. Movers bring the goods, elevator and cable mechanics set them in place, maintenance shuts down the fire prevention system. Quick 3-step plan.
Any sense at all, have you heard anything, even anecdotally, from the cops about how many people managed to get out of the building before they collapsed?
No, absolutely not. But there's also, I don't know if it was the case now, but I do know that one of the towers had a major elevator that went all the way to the top that was malfunctioning and has been malfunctioning for at least a month. They've been having a lot of trouble with that.
Aside from the mysterious elevator workers of the oddly chronically broken elevators and the Israeli movers contracted by Zim Shipping Company, itself partly Israeli state-owned, which broke a $50,000 lease in the World Trade Center to relocate to Virginia a week before 9/11, who else had suspicious access to the towers? In 2002, a simple case of fraud over fake IDs in Tennessee led to the arrest of 6 Middle Eastern men and revealed damning information about 9/11, about men claiming to have done work in the basement of the towers with fake passes. The key witness, herself an accomplice in the ID fraud, was killed a day before her trial date. Catherine Smith, a Department of Motor Vehicles employee had been working with Khalid Otala from Jerusalem to provide Tennessee licenses, which do not require social security numbers, for 5 other men. The FBI, working on a tip, arrested Otala outside the DMV after he purchased the IDs from Smith. They had been monitoring Catherine Smith's house. She had also bought her car from Otala, one she would be found dead inside of later. The following group, Mohammed Fairs, Abdel Muhsin Hamad, Mostafa Abu Shahid, and Omar Kayata, were all arrested as they were also waiting outside for Otala to return from the DMV. The underlings told investors that Khalid or Sakur Hamad, the cousin of Abdul Muhsin Hamad, could get the IDs. Oddly, the 2 ringleaders would be released while the underlings had the book thrown at them. Zakir Hamad, who had shared a residence with Otala Khalid, was arrested, and on his person he had a pass granting him entry into the 6 underground levels of World Trade Center 1. It was dated September 5, 2001. Khalid Otala had also driven a truck from New York to Tennessee on 9/11. Hamad claimed that he had been doing work on the sprinkler systems for a couple of days, and that is why he had a pass. The problem with that, as Alan Hicks, the spokesperson of the Port Authority of New York, pointed out, the New York Port Authority handles its own work on such systems, and no one there had contracted Hamad. Hamad gave police a card for Magic Heating and Plumbing. He also had a card at the time of his arrest. In court, his father produced a letter signed by Sergei Davydenko for Denko Mechanical, verifying both Sahir Mohammed and his cousin's employment. Davydenko told the New York Times Hamad had been working in the World Trade Center for him for a couple of days. The problem is, there was no Magic Heating and Plumbing or Denko Mechanical. There was an obsolete business license for Denko, and the address for the office was simply Davydenko's residential address. Quite similar to the elevator operator's fiasco. One woman who may have been able to shed light on the entire matter was Catherine Smith, but the day before her trial, she had a car accident and died. Actually, her body had been burned inside her car, but the gas tank failed to ignite. Witnesses had seen Smith ablaze in her car, and investigators found gasoline in her clothing. FBI agent Susan Nash said Smith had been murdered. The unresolved questions about 9/11 and Smith's death had nothing outside of the circumstantial to do with the trial over fake IDs, however. Hamad was released on a $250,000 bail. What kind of truck driver or repairman has that kind of money? And Otala, the middleman, was released hours after being sentenced. Why was Khalid released? And why wasn't there a follow-up investigation into Denko Mechanical? George Bush Sr. was the director when the CIA was preparing intelligence cells in Pakistan and Afghanistan to fight a proxy war with the Soviet Union and Afghanistan. Call them modern privateers.
In the early 1980s, bin Laden worked with operatives from U.S. intelligence, the Pakistani military, and Arab states. They ran a wide-ranging covert network that recruited and financed Muslim fighters to battle the Soviet army.
These units were used again to finance 9/11 hijackers, who were under the protection by top officials of Chertoff and Goss, who intentionally stifled FBI attempts to investigate members of these cells, thus assuring 9/11's success. The question is, did the privateers double-cross the U.S. in a form of blowback, or was it jointly planned? It was planned and assisted. Not only were the bagmen who financed the operation protected, the hijackers themselves were relocated 2 steps ahead of the FBI, thanks to the Israelis' phone taps and monitoring of both the feds and the hijackers themselves.
Some American terrorism investigators fear certain suspects in the September 11th attacks may have managed to stay ahead of them by knowing who and when investigators are calling on the telephone.
And what troubles investigators most, particularly in New York in the counterterrorism investigation of the World Trade Center attack, is that on a number of cases, suspects that they had sought to wiretap and surveil immediately changed their telecommunications processes. They started acting much differently as soon as those supposedly secret wiretaps went into place.
They also monitored the airports and planes. Those were needed to explain and justify the event. The assured damage was done by bombs within the buildings. As you already saw, bombs and bombers were found on 9/11. The bombers were released, and the steel from the building was quickly destroyed, shipped off to China and India. There is no way this was done simply as a double cross. No one but the government itself would have the means to do something like run a drill of the exact scenario of 9/11 on 9/11 to assure that interceptors would be too far away and confused to stop the planes.
Hi, Boston Center TMU. We have a problem here. We have a hijacked aircraft headed towards New York, and we need you guys to, we need someone to scramble some F-16s or something up there to help us out.
Is this real world or exercise?
No, this is not an exercise.
Dick Cheney, Vice President and husband of the President of Lockheed Martin, and the leader of Project 908, purposely held back defense until it was too late to act. Bin Laden did not have the authority or power to force FBI agents off of his trail. Bin Laden didn't have the means to set up a false flag and steal anthrax from within American labs and take credit for it with his hijackers and associate it to Iraq to falsely lead America into believing that Iraq and Al-Qaeda were together and start a war there to bog down American forces. The U.S. and Israel did that all on their own. Robert Mueller, the former director of the FBI, finally told CNN in September of 2002 that, quote, there was no legal proof to prove the identities of the suicidal hijackers. There seems to be a lot of mystery surrounding Mohammed Atta. He's the lead hijacker, dubbed so by the mass media. He was the one used to link Iraq to anthrax unfairly, and then this guy takes a bag with him on his final attack with all the plans in it and all the names of all the hijackers on his final flight, which if discovered would ruin the entire thing. He lived next door to Israeli spies, and he was spotted on the casino ships of Jack Abramoff, a Zionist lobbyist, on September 5th, just 6 days before the attack.
Doing some follow-up on what we knew about Mohammed Atta leading up to 9/11.
That's right. Some witnesses, apparently there was a redacted form of what people in the intelligence community knew regarding that man right there, Mohammed Atta, and in the Able Danger program. And apparently the report had been redacted. All the names had been blacked out. Well, FoxNews.com got a clean copy and called a number of the witnesses, 5 in all. All of them said that we told investigators one thing, and none of those things actually showed up in the 9/11 Commission. And in fact, the investigators from the Department of Defense were a little agitated and seemed aggressive.
So why wouldn't that show up in that report? Well, these 5 witnesses claimed that the Defense Department was worried about taking some of the blame for 9/11. But here's what I don't understand. Why wouldn't they put in the report these findings? Because maybe that would look at least like they were kind of following the trail of Mohammed Atta instead of just having this whole situation happen. You know, at least it gives the American public the image that at least we're kind of onto him.
Yeah, but then,
I don't know which one's worse.
But were we onto him, and did we have a picture of him, and did we know that? Did we know him by name? And the name at that point was Mohammed El Sayed. And if we did know him, why didn't we stop him? That's the problem.
But does it look any worse than in August, Bin Laden determined to attack in the U.S.? That looks bad. There was so many mistakes. There was so many times where we had a chance to get Bin Laden. You can go back and back and back. But for some reason, the Defense Department put their line in the sand and said these 5 people that brought up the fact that we were tracking a cell that included Mohammed Atta in it leading up to 9/11 was redacted, not included. And now Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer would not stand for this. He said it was called Operation Able Danger, and we were tracking Mohammed Atta. And when he was interviewed by Phil Zelkow, who ended up joining the State Department, he said, you know, Tony, this is an important part of the story. We'll make sure it's in the 9/11 report. And it wasn't. There was no follow-up. And Colonel Shaffer would not be corralled. Now, I don't understand how this led to Operation Dark Heart and the purchases of 9,500 books by the Defense Department that were essentially destroyed.
That were written by Schaefer.
Written by Schaefer.
His new book.
They burned them.
They did.
Well, what's going on? Because some people who agreed to speak to FoxNews.com did so without giving their names because they fear repercussions. I mean, come on. What kind of repercussions could there... I mean, I believe that they fear repercussions. What I'm saying is, why should they be put in that position where they would actually fear that? I mean, aren't we all on the same team here? I think.
They could...
There have been several Osama bin Laden tapes to hit the news, as well as Al-Qaeda tapes, and these things are fake. They seem to pop up regularly when Bush was up for re-election.
This will assure his followers that A, he's alive and well, he's still in the game, and his followers, Rick, just haven't seen him, and when they do, it's likely to invigorate the movement. He's still very much the inspiration for Al-Qaeda.
How do we know that this thing is legit?
Well, you know, this is being flagged by Al-Sahab, which is Al-Qaeda's media arm, and every other video or audio message that's come out that's been flagged by Al-Sahab has been legit, Rick, so we expect that this one will be too.
One of the bin Laden tapes was so bad that it actually took footage from a film made in 2006 called Road to Guantanamo and passed it off like it was original footage. This made it on all the networks. After these debunkles, they go to voice-only tapes, but those get debunked as well. But one would think anything supposedly from Osama bin Laden would be under the microscope more than anything else and have more scrutiny than anything else. And yet, Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden are on the news multiple times as known fakes.
Adam Gadon, the so-called American Al-Qaeda who proclaimed himself the media maven, if you will, for Al-Qaeda and was helping to produce a lot of these so-called Al-Qaeda videos that were all over the internet that made Al-Qaeda look really bad and made the Muslims look bad.
Should you fail to comply in full, we will deem it sufficient justification to continue to fight and kill Americans.
Come to find out, Adam Gadon's real name was Adam Perlman. And not only was he, in fact, Jewish, he was the grandson of a member of the board of the Anti-Defamation League. And if you've been following the history of the Anti-Defamation League, you will find out they've been very much involved in covertly supporting a lot of these so-called American Nazi movements. In fact, all the way back, just about the time of World War II, there was this scandal where the head of the American Nazi Party, which had a total membership of like 6, and yet they were getting all this press, was arrested for embezzling from his sponsors, which turned out to be the ADL, so that kind of blew up in their faces. So anyway, we have Adam Perlman, and he's been going around saying, I'm Al-Qaeda, I'm Al-Qaeda, see, I got a turban on my head, I'm a terrible Muslim, gotta hate me, gotta be afraid of me, and of course everybody's laughing at him now because we all know who he is. Okay, so they have brought in the understudy, and there is a new American Al-Qaeda named Yusuf al-Khattab. Ooh, big scary name, and they've got a picture of him out there where he's holding all these guns and knives, and he's dressed up like a wannabe Rambo, and he's scowling at the camera, and he supposedly has this website with things in it, like pictures of the Statue of Liberty with an axe buried in the back of the head. I mean, very heavy-handed, very over-the-top.
There was also a link to a puppet show mocking Danny Pearl's beheading. Take a look.
Oh, that's awful. You know, just looking more like a movie prop than anything else here. So, as it turns out, this is another fake. His real name is Joseph Cohen.
He's a 39-year-old New York City taxi driver, as you mentioned. He called himself Yusef Al-Khattab, but he was born Joseph Cohen here in America. He is a Jew.
And he is another manufactured front to try and convince Americans that Al-Qaeda is actually here in the United States. And this is why we've got to be doing this, doing surveillance on the American people and reading their email and listening to their phone calls and all this stuff, because you never know when we're going to get into a situation with the American Al-Qaeda. And it's all a front. It's a fake.
He was not their commander. There is also no evidence that bin Laden used the term Al-Qaeda to refer to the name of a group until after September the 11th, when he realized that this was the term the Americans had given him.
There was constant discussion about him hiding out in caves, and I think many times the American people have a perception that it's a little hole dug out of a side of a mountain.
Oh, no.
This is it. This is a fortress.
Yes.
A complex, multi-tiered, bedrooms and offices on the top, as you can see. Secret exits on the side and on the bottom. Cut deep to avoid thermal detection. A ventilation system to allow people to breathe and to carry on. The entrance is large enough to drive trucks and even tanks, even computer systems and telephone systems. It's a very sophisticated operation.
Oh, you bet. This is serious business. And there's not one of those. There are many of those.
Oh, I think we've seen this cartoon rhetoric before. There weren't many of those. There weren't any of those. Now, Atta and Al-Amari went out of their way to get on camera on September 10th, the night before the attack. They went to 2 different ATMs, which we have pictures of, a gas station and a Walmart. And then, of course, they're on camera at the airport in Maine. There's a big problem with this, though. Al-Amari isn't dead. The name mix-ups aside, whose face is on the ATM photo? And just who the hell is in the video in Maine? I don't buy the FBI's mix-up excuse at all. What are the odds of a man from Saudi Arabia who had been to America and reported his passport stolen, who just so happened to have the exact same name and birthday as the proposed 9/11 hijacker? It is much more probable that the Israelis stole a passport and the Al-Amari hijacker was just using a stolen identity, as were many of them. You can chalk one up to coincidence, but 7? No. There's 7 living hijackers and 1 who died before the event. That's 8 out of 19 who could not have possibly participated in it. And yet the very fraudulent Osama bin Laden confession tapes give praise to people who weren't even involved. I'm going to agree with Seymour Hersh's investigation in the New Yorker. Whatever trail was left deliberately for the FBI to find. He was told by a senior military officer, because of the visas and other documentation needed to infiltrate team members into the United States, a major intelligence service might also have been involved. Yeah, you think?
We would like to correct a report that appeared on CNN last night. Based on information from multiple law enforcement sources, CNN reported that Adnan Bukhari and a brother, Amir of Vero Beach, Florida, were suspected to be 2 of the pilots who crashed into the World Trade Center. Today, CNN learned that Adnan Bukhari is still in Florida, where he was questioned yesterday by the FBI, and after taking a lie detector test, today he was cleared of involvement in Tuesday's airliner attacks. We are sorry for the misinformation. Through his attorney, Bukhari says he is not connected at all with this, that he is helping authorities, and that any documents that they found with his name means his identity was stolen. He says Amir Bukhari, who he says is not his brother, died in a small plane crash last year.
The living Omari, who is the FBI's current and second pick, reported that his passport had been stolen. This is worse than his year forgeries, and yet, where was the media? Osama bin Laden's brother was having breakfast with George Bush's father to discuss business deals. George Bush Jr. was in Florida reading a book to some kids. Apparently this book had a little television inside of it which magically had the first plane hitting the towers on it. Because Bush claimed not once but twice that he saw the first plane hit. That was impossible because coverage of the first plane hitting didn't air on the day of 9/11. It came after when they found the French filmmakers. who caught the attack serendipitously.
Chief of Staff, well, first of all, when we walked in the classroom, I had seen this plane fly into the first building. There was a TV set on, and you know, I thought it was pilot error.
It's almost as if he had rehearsed what to say and then royally messed it up.
Was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw an airplane hit the tower of a TV. You know, the TV was obviously on, and I used to fly myself, and I said, well, there's one terrible pilot. And
Why didn't the Secret Service react after the second plane hit to get the president out of his publicly announced location if they were so worried about terrorism? And where was Mr. Dick? Dick Cheney was in a PEOC bunker making damn sure the next plane hit its target. Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta recounts.
During the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon, there was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out, the plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Well, at the time I didn't know what all that meant. And
the flight you're referring to is the
flight that came into the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Did Cheney order a stand down or a shoot down? Considering that he tries to lie about his whereabouts, and the little fact that the Pentagon was hit, shows that the order wasn't a shoot down, and the young man wouldn't be questioning the orders or quoting the miles either if it were. By default, the orders are to stand down until the proper authorities say to shoot down. Thus the man was asking, are the orders to still stand by for orders to shoot because the plane is really close? The 9/11 cover-up or commission will claim that Dick Cheney didn't arrive at the Presidential Emergency Office Center until 9:58 a.m. They can't take a later timestamp than that because we have a photograph of all of them at 9:59 when the first World Trade Center was collapsing. This is a half hour after Mineta overheard the conversation about the plane being 50 miles out. This would place Dick Cheney there after the Pentagon had been struck. And they will claim the conversation about 50 miles out and 10 miles out was about Flight 93, not Flight 77. There's a big problem with that. If they were talking about Flight 93 was never 50 miles away, much less 10 miles out. Flight 93 went down in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, which is a hell of a lot further than 10 miles from D.C. Norman Mineta arrived at 9:20, and Cheney and Rice were already there. Richard Clarke, the terrorism czar, stated in his book Against All Enemies that he arrived at 9:03, just as the second plane had hit the World Trade Center, and shortly after, certainly before 9:58, went into the Presidential Emergency Office Center to find that Cheney and Rice were already there, and recalls that later Mineta arrives at around 9:20 because they were looking for him. That means that Cheney was there between 9:03 and 9:20, if not earlier. White House photographer David Burrow would tell Peter Jennings at ABC News that shortly after 9, the Secret Service came to Cheney's office and said, "Sir, you have to come with us." And Cheney himself said on Meet the Press on September 16, 2001, "When I arrived there in short order, we had word the Pentagon had been hit." So that's 3 eyewitnesses plus Cheney himself confirming that Cheney was there before the Pentagon was hit. Of course, the White House photographer and the Vice President gave these accounts before the Mineta testimony to the 9/11 Commission. Also, Condoleezza Rice and the Commission claimed that she arrived there shortly after Cheney. It would be an extremely narrow window for Rice to arrive after Cheney after 9:58. Yet all of them are there for the photograph at 9:59 of the World Trade Center collapsing. There is no way she had all those conversations with Clarke and the principals within those seconds. Dick Cheney and Lee Hamilton are liars, no shock there. And the 9/11 Commission would delete Norman Mineta's testimony from their video archives. However, we recorded it from C-SPAN. It wasn't just moles in the State Department and DOD impeding the FBI's investigation into 9/11 suspects. The FBI was impeding the FBI's investigation into 9/11. With all the obvious mistakes about the hijackers' identities, the phony bin Laden tapes, the physics of the building, the lies about the anthrax, the lies about weapons of mass destruction, the way the whole narrative was woven together with 9/11, you'd think somebody should be explaining this. There ought to be an investigation into this. Let's take a look at a couple of the alleged hijackers of Flight 77 that hit the Pentagon. Future alleged 9/11 hijackers Al-Hazmi and Al-Midhar lived openly in the U.S. under their real names, despite attending an Al-Qaeda summit meeting in Malaysia where they had been photographed, and their hub in Yemen being bugged. Both got visas from the CIA's fast-track program in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, as did a majority of the hijackers. But the CIA was preventing this information from reaching the FBI. Doug Matson of the 9/11 Commission's staff and former CIA deputy director expressed as much that the CIA was intentionally omitting information. And what's the gain by that? Well, you have to ask yourself, just how separate is Al-Qaeda and the CIA? Why are so many terrorists who attack U.S. targets ex-CIA? Furthermore, why are so many CIA agents blocking investigation into some of these same terrorists? They can fight side by side in Afghanistan, Chechnya, Bosnia, or Kosovo, but that's when they're our terrorists. We know the CIA isn't losing any sleep over the heroin trade being reopened in Afghanistan. Illegal drug markets are half the shadow economy for key Central Asian states like Azerbaijan, crucial in controlling non-OPEC Caspian oil and gas. Conflict in Afghanistan also forces oil west and down through the Israeli keyhole before it can go to East Asia. The only potential break in that monopoly now being a direct route from Iran. And look who's in the crosshairs. Of course, there was a moment after the Egyptian revolution that Libyan oil could go through the Suez, but NATO took care of that. And China still wants its contracts from Gaddafi, though.
China worries over its Libyan interests as the unrest in Libya continues to unfold. The Chinese regime urged Libya's rebels to keep their oil trade agreements on Tuesday.
In light of the recent unrest and political changes in Libya, the Chinese regime is growing anxious over its existing deals in the tumultuous country.
Other crucial access ports without a Western military presence in the Gulf of Aden are Bassano, Somalia, and Aden of Yemen. So odd how the USS Cole bombing was in Aden in 2000, and it involved Al-Midhar. But of course, he gets to live openly in the United States, and others allegedly involved in the USS Cole attack all escape or are released from prison. At least they went to prison. That's more than what was done after the USS Liberty attack. Was the USS Cole an Al-Qaeda bombing, or was Al-Qaeda a front for a false flag? Barbara Bodine blocked John O'Neill's investigations into the USS Cole bombing. The captain just happened to be a close personal friend of hers.
And irony is that the captain of the ship is a personal friend of mine, just one of those odd coincidences.
O'Neill probably wanted to answer the most obvious questions about the event, like, why was the Cole even there, instead of going to refuel in Bahrain as it was scheduled to do? How did the terrorists know it was going to be there? And just where did they get the C-4? We may never know the answers because the investigation was about as open as the Oklahoma City investigation or the anthrax investigation. And once again, as always, the security footage of the event was edited and is useless. There's no footage of the attack. John O'Neill also had his investigation into bin Laden squashed, and his investigators pulled off hot trails.
They had been coming in and out of the U.S. on legal visas.
John O'Neill took a job with Kroll after being hired by Jerome Hauer, who was involved in the actual anthrax attack. Just 2 weeks after getting his job, John O'Neill died in the South Tower on 9/11. This could all be outrageous incompetence and coincidence, or it could be simple collusion. Then, look at the whole picture. It's hard to know where to start on 9/11. There's so many things wrong with the "we got attacked out of the blue because they hate us for our freedoms" ignorance. Lying about why someone would want to attack the United States is bad enough. But then listen to the story of who allegedly attacked the United States. The media said it was done by 19 Muslim guys who conveniently left us a list with their names and plans on it, as well as not one but 2 magical unburned passports. One discovered near Ground Zero by New York Police Chief Bernard Kerik, who is currently in jail for fraud. The other from Flight 93 of hijacker Zaid al-Jarrah, whose first cousin Ali al-Jarrah was later busted in Lebanon as a spy for Israel. They also left a nice, neat paper trail, complete with Korans left at strip clubs and bars by the devout Muslims. Some will say the list was left for their own fame, only that doesn't make sense because officially the list of names was in the luggage of Mohammed Atta, who was taking it on his final flight, and just by chance his bag happened to not get checked in on his connection flight. Best of all, their leader, Osama bin Laden, who the U.S. intelligence agencies went out of their way to botch chances at apprehending, was said to be hiding in Afghanistan, a target of the U.S. well before 9/11. In fact, the U.S. already had invasion drills set in place prior to 9/11. Osama, whose name quickly became Osama, maybe to remove the USA at the front of it, was said to be in a high-tech cave in Afghanistan, plotting the next moves of Al-Qaeda. The high-tech caves, which Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld said there were many of,
and there's not one of those, there are many of those,
and the Pentagon drew up cartoons for, didn't actually exist. In 2011, Obama announced the U.S. had found and killed Osama bin Laden in Pakistan. No photos were released, and his body was dumped into the ocean.
Pakistan's on our side. Afghanistan is half and half. But right on that border is Osama bin Laden, most likely. And he's probably in Pakistan.
There was pre-written legislation ready to pass, and when it looked like it might not work, there was an anthrax attack to help push it along. This was initially blamed on Al-Qaeda, who oddly, even though they hate us for our freedoms, decided to rope Israel into the mix as well by declaring death to America, death to Israel. And just in case you forgot it was Muslims from 9/11, they also wrote Allah is great and 9/11 2001 as well. Which is funny because it would later be the Israeli security forces claiming to have witnessed a transfer of anthrax from Iraqis to Al-Qaeda at a meeting in Prague, which was impossible since neither Iraq nor Al-Qaeda had anthrax, and there wasn't even a meeting in Prague for them to meet in. How does one witness a transfer of something at a meeting that didn't take place between two parties that didn't have it? The target choices of the military-grade made in the USA anthrax were interesting as well. The two senators against the Patriot Act, Patrick Leahy, on the Judiciary chair in a position to block it, and the other, Tom Daschle, the Senate Majority Leader, also calling to investigate 9/11, were sent the lethal spores, whereas warmongering Fox News and Judith Miller, a WMD liar, were sent hoax anthrax, so they claimed. Despite all these holes in the anthrax story, it gets far worse. A letter written to the Department of Justice jumped the gun trying to frame someone for the attacks. The problem being, it was mailed 2 days after the first anthrax had been sent, but long before any of the letters had been opened or reported on. Worst of all, even though by December of 2001 the FBI knew it was looking at domestic terrorism, the anthrax myth persisted about Iraq, and Colin Powell used this scare tactic in his speech to the UN as evidence of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, saying they could produce anthrax and kill thousands. Speaking about mobile weapons labs, a lie echoed by the now convicted criminal Judith Miller, who spent 85 days in jail over the Plain Libya affair, Powell said to the UN while holding a mock vial of anthrax.
For example, they can produce anthrax and botulinum toxin. In fact, they can produce enough dry biological agent in a single month to kill thousands upon thousands of people. And dry agent of this type is the most lethal form for human beings.
Cheney also reiterated this lie on Meet the Press, restating the same propaganda. The FBI ordered the Ames strain destroyed, and then went on a wild goose chase through different suspects who had been pegged by the ADL, and ultimately landed on a guy, Bruce Ivins, who had an odd suicide overdosing on Tylenol. Later evidence shows he could not have made the anthrax from his lab. Dr. Perry Mixell, also a prior suspect, also had a strange suicide. Of course, the Congress caved on the Patriot Act and both wars. A commission was finally set up to deal with investigating what happened on and prior to 9/11. It wasn't something the Bush administration wanted. Bush was adamant about blocking the formation of a commission to investigate 9/11. Well, why would the President of the United States not want 9/11 to be investigated? He battled with Tom Daschle, Majority Leader of the Senate and an anthrax target, about who would conduct an investigation. It wasn't until more than a year later that he conditionally permitted it. The conditions were that the Bush administration selected the commission heads, who then selected and controlled the commission. It's a little bit like hiring Dracula to guard the blood bank. It would be like hiring Madoff to investigate fraud. You might as well have a former head of the CIA investigate the Kennedy assassination, or have Boris Yeltsin investigate Boris Berezovsky. Wait, those last two actually did happen. Bush's first pick to chair the 9/11 Commission was Henry Kissinger, upon the advice of Karl Rove. Henry Kissinger, a crook with a rap sheet so long and involved in disastrous covert operations and lies that no one could take him seriously. He resigned not because of that, but because he didn't want to disclose his clients. Because of the obvious conflicts of interest and the utterly negative credibility, Kissinger finally removed himself from the position. That didn't stop his less well-known business partner from making the cut, James R. Thompson. An interesting phenomena occurred on 9/11 where individuals using the Israeli-based instant messenger service Otigo were warned about 9/11 before the attack. At least 2 individuals came forward about the warnings they had received. Certainly bin Laden wasn't warning these American Jews to avoid the towers. Someone else had prior knowledge. Hollinger Inc. and Hollinger Digital owns Onset Tech, which cooperates with the messenger software of Otigo as well as Converse. When you pull up the board of directors for Hollinger, you'll find some nefarious characters. Henry Kissinger, Richard Pearl, and James R. Thompson from the 9/11 Commission. With Thompson on the 9/11 Commission, you can be damn sure they didn't look into Otigo. It was Hollinger-owned papers also that spread the bogus rumor about 4,000 Jews not showing up to work on the day of 9/11. This served to obfuscate the very real forewarnings from Otigo by masking it as pointless anti-Jewish rhetoric. Hollinger would later be used by Pearl to bolster his Iraq War investments, and then it had a large scandal with Conrad Black, of which Thompson was also a part of. He ended up not doing much on the commission at all for a year. But not to be outdone by that audacious selection for the commissioners, the Bush administration topped itself in see-through corruption by choosing Iran-Contra's Tower Commission chairman, who worked with Dick Cheney, to co-chair the 9/11 Commission as well. I guess if you do well with one whitewash, then why not another one? Hamilton was also sitting on advisory boards for the CIA. But don't worry, they could still go lower. Much, much lower. Even worse than Hamilton becoming the co-chairman was placing a Zionist warmonger, Philip Zelikow, who was plucked right out of Bush's own National Security Council to be the executive director for the commission. Zelikow would have total control over hiring the 9/11 commissioner's staff and set up a tight filtering system over information sharing that went right through himself or Hamilton. One of his first actions was to hire Michael Hurley, a current officer in the CIA, to investigate the CIA. He also echoed the neocons' propaganda about Iraq and 9/11. How pathetic for the 9/11 Commission's executive director to parrot the baseless Iraq did 9/11 deceptions. It wasn't new for Zelikow, it was an opportunity to promote his worldview. In their book on the Israeli lobby, Mearsheimer and Walt exposed Zelikow for calling for war with Iraq to protect Israeli interests in speeches that he gave to universities. Zelikow would later admit as much with a so what attitude. Apparently, he forgot the 9/11 Commission was to investigate an attack on America and not to be a tool for Israeli interest. No one was really looking into 9/11. They were looking into how to use it. There was one dissenter in Zelikow's way, a staff member that slipped through the cracks, Donna Lesman. Breaking Zelikow's filter protocol, Lesman dug into the direct 9/11 connections with the government of Saudi Arabia. Zelikow fired her and had her findings deleted from the 9/11 Commission's report, 28 pages redacted. Perhaps she asked how a Saudi GIT agent, working with the FBI, was providing housing and actually living with 9/11 hijackers.
National security whistleblowers tried to testify before the commission, but were either not asked to testify or their testimony was only barely acknowledged, or worse yet, completely omitted from the record.
Zelikow was later revealed to be the real author of the Bush Doctrine, the justification of preemptive war, which has led to the deaths of more than 1 million people so far.
Zelikow was the author of a very important document issued by the White House in September 2002 that really turned military doctrine on its head and said that the United States could become involved in preemptive war, preemptive defense, that we could attack a nation that didn't pose an immediate military threat to this country. And obviously in September 2002, it sure appeared that that document was being written with one target in mind, Iraq. Now, as I say, the author of the document at the time was anonymous. We didn't know that Philip Zelikow had written this thing. And that becomes known, I think, widely on the staff only in the final months of the 9/11 Commission investigation, and it appeared to pose yet another conflict of interest for Zelikow.
Thomas Keane, the other co-chairman of the commission, was there about as often as Obama went to the Senate. He was too busy engaged in his own personal profiteering racket. He said he could only commit 1 day a week to the commission and would only appear in the press if it was with Hamilton. Apparently, investigating 9/11 was not important enough for him to postpone his other affairs, and this allowed Hamilton and Zelikow even more control over the operation. Like James Thompson, Thomas Keane was too involved with his own scandals. What excellent choices for investigators. It's not like 3,000 people were killed. Keane later promoted and was greatly impressed with the comic book version of the 9/11 report, which reduced it down to about 161 picture pages. And he is currently still going around the country hacking this junk into school systems to get elementary school kids even to learn about 9/11.
When you hear about the idea of the 9/11 Commission report as essentially a comic book, your first reaction is, what are you, crazy?
It's accurate. I mean, the graphic version is accurate. That's what happened.
How could they compromise the integrity of the investigation further? What could make it even less objective? Fred Fielding, a current lawyer for Z, better known as Blackwater, a private mercenary firm currently on trial for murder and rape. This bastard actually countersued the families of the contractors' victims hung from a bridge in Fallujah to block them from gaining access into the circumstances surrounding the event. The details of what really happened are uncovered in Jeremy Scahill's book, Blackwater, Rise of the Mercenary State. Fielding wasn't the only important investigator working with Blackwater. The Inspector General, who was supposed to let the other shoe drop on Hollinger and Richard Pearl, also found employment at Blackwater as a senior executive. You see the DVD extra to unravel that mess. Fielding was from George Bush's White House counsel. But don't worry, he was compromised further than that. He was a lawyer for a very high-level man in the Bush administration. You may have heard of him. His name is George Bush. It's bad enough that Bush refused to be interviewed by the commission without Cheney, but he also had his lawyer there, and on the side of the investigators.
President, why are you and the Vice President insisting on appearing together before the 9/11 Commission?
Because the 9/11 Commission wants to ask us questions. That's why we're meeting, and I look forward to meeting with them and answering their questions.
Why you're appearing together rather than separately, which was their request?
Because it's a good chance for both of us to answer questions that the 9/11 Commission is looking forward to asking us, and I'm looking forward to answering them. Let's see.
Don't you think that the families deserve to have a transcript or to be able to see what you
Adam,
said?
you asked me that question yesterday. I got the same answer, yeah.
You're one of those 4 that gets to see these documents. Would that change your opinion?
No. They don't want any more eyeballs to see their documents than they can possibly get away with. It's a scam. It's absolutely disgusting. The President has said only a minority of the Commission can see a minority of the documents, and then they have to clear what they're going to say to the rest of the Commission with the White House.
These blatant conflicts of interest should have been all over the news like a Tiger Woods sex scandal, but they were too busy promoting other things. The 9/11 Commission was a cover-up. It was a total joke, a farce. Heck, why not allow PNAC members to do the investigation? They did. John Lehman, former Secretary of the Navy in 1987, while Jonathan Pollard was spying for Israel through naval intel, was also chosen to join the 9/11 conmen, and he was a PNAC signature. PNAC, the Project for a New American Century, was a neoconservative think tank from the American Enterprise Institute. Its members comprised Department of Defense officials and media. They pulled together older Israeli-centric plans from Odin Yinon and IASPA's Clean Break papers to create their magnum opus, Rebuilding America's Defenses. There's been a lot of focus on lines from that particular document, but this narrow scope has overshadowed their other important works, particularly on Afghanistan and Iraq. I can't go over all of them, I have in previous films, but here's an overview. This is what the Lie Factory cranked out. Of course, these are also the men who lied about Prague, Atta, and anthrax. The 9/11 Commission was an extension of the PNAC narrative of deception. Their report ignored the existence of core columns in the Twin Towers. The information on Saudi Arabia was redacted, and the info on Israel didn't even make it that far. Perhaps the most shocking and awful was their investigation into the World Trade Center No. 7. They didn't even do one. They spent $12 million to tell you nothing. Real American patriots have investigated it on their own for free. And trust me, it's an uphill battle against disinfo and ridicule. And a lot of people knew it was going to happen too. There were massive profits made. The crisis allowed for trillions of dollars to become unaccounted for. And the data that was housed that could track the massive corporate fraud was physically destroyed by the section of the Pentagon that was hit, as well as Building 7 in New York.
For the Pentagon, when its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
$2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
Yet, how do you prosecute the government? Obviously, they don't investigate themselves. Thus, the Inspector General of the Defense Department is just part of the military-industrial complex, and the 9/11 Commission was itself composed of PNAC members, war profiteers, and criminals of prior cover-ups. We can't rely on these investigations. And where is our media? The U.S. is always at war or part of some conflict, and it doesn't matter if you rename a war a police action or whatever. It's a war. The point of war for the U.S. is not to win, but to prolong. In order to operate, the MIC needs conflicts. Perpetual war is their openly stated goal. Perpetual war means perpetual profits. Ultimately, they aim to monopolize vital resources, destroy potential economic or military rivals, devalue currencies to wipe out the middle class, and rule with impunity as corporate oligarchs in a globalized shadow government. Let's declassify the evidence we already have. Let's see what was on the hard drives confiscated from Urban Moving Systems. Let's release the tapes of the Israelis celebrating with the towers burning in the background. Let's see what was redacted from the 9/11 report, removed to protect the money coming from Saudi Arabia. Let's see all of it. Let's have a real investigation into 9/11. I'm pretty damn sure what the results would be, but I'd like to have an official investigation rather than just me doing it. I want heads to roll. Pass this film around and make it happen.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.